All right, something really strange happened in the football world this week, specifically over at Arsenal. You know, a player signs a new contract, and you'd expect fans to be celebrating, right? Well, not this time. Instead, a whole lot of them were just completely confused and even angry. So let's get into it. We're going to break down the very strange case of Leandro Trossard's new contract.
And yeah, the reaction was instant. I mean, the second this news dropped, social media just exploded. Fans were scrambling, trying to figure out what was going on, because on the face of it, this move seemed to fly in the face of everything Arsenal was saying they were going to do. So, what exactly was the deal?
So there it is. This was the headline that just sent everyone into a spin. Leandro Trossard, a guy who, mind you, had been linked with a transfer out of the club all summer, suddenly agrees to a new contract with a bigger salary. I mean, look, for Trossard himself, great news for sure. But for Arsenal and its fans, this just opened up a massive can of worms.
Okay, Section 1, a confusing contract renewal. To really get why the fans were so baffled, we have to look at the details of this deal, because let me tell you, this was not your standard contract extension. Not even close.
And here's where things get really, really weird. So Trossard gets a pay raise, which is normal, but the length of his contract? It didn't change, not by a single day. It still runs out in 2027. So think about that. Arsenal just decided to spend more money on a player without getting any extra security in return. They're paying him more, but he can still just walk away for free in a few years. It makes no sense from a business standpoint.
All right, Section 2, the reason for fan fury. So that really bizarre contract structure, that's what leads us right into why the fans were so upset. It all came down to the club's strategy and some seriously questionable timing.
And this slide really lays it all out, doesn't it? The conflict is crystal clear. Look, everyone knew what Arsenal's summer plan was. They needed to sell players, raise some cash, and clear space on the wage bill for a huge new signing. And what did the Trossard deal do? The literal opposite. It piled more money onto the wage bill for a guy already on the team, which just makes it that much harder to sign someone new.
£100 million. That was the number everyone was talking about. Reports were saying Arsenal had to raise over £100 million just from selling players to be able to afford the guys they wanted to buy. So you can see why every single penny counts. Every pound spent keeping the current squad happy is a pound they can't use to chase their big targets.
And this is the craziest part. You want to talk about irony? To hit that £100 million target, guess who was on the list of potential sales? Yep, Leandro Trossard himself. So, you tell me, why on earth would you give a pay raise to a player you might be trying to sell? None of it was adding up. It just made zero sense.
Okay, Section 3, a fortuitous injury twist. Right when everyone was scratching their heads, the whole story took a sharp turn. Something happened that, for a moment, looked like it might actually explain everything.
So, opening day of the season. Hopes are high, and then, disaster. Star attacker Kai Havertz goes down with a pretty nasty-looking knee injury. All of a sudden, Arsenal are looking thin up front. And of course, what did everyone immediately think? Aha, that's it. They panicked after the injury and gave Trossard a new deal to make sure he stayed. It seemed like a perfect explanation, except it was completely wrong.
You see, the timeline tells the real story. Here's the thing. Trossard's new deal was already agreed to before August 16th. The season didn't even start until the 18th. And that Havertz injury, it happened during that first match. So the contract deal was done and dusted before anyone even knew Havertz was going to get hurt. The two things had absolutely nothing to do with each other.
Now, just because the injury didn't cause the deal doesn't mean it didn't have a massive impact. It completely changed the outcome. One minute, Trossard is a guy the club might sell. The next minute, Havertz is injured and Trossard is suddenly an absolutely critical player for the team. He became almost impossible to sell overnight. All of a sudden, what looked like a bizarre decision, well, it started to look like a stroke of genius.
Which brings us to Section 4, the rule that forced it. Okay, so if the Havertz injury had nothing to do with it, we're back to our original question. Why the heck did this deal happen right before the season started? Well, the answer wasn't on the pitch or in the transfer market. It was buried deep inside the official Premier League rulebook. I mean, this is the key question, isn't it? Why the big rush? Why not just wait a few more weeks, see if another club comes in with an offer for him? It turns out, Arsenal didn't have a choice. They were racing against a clock that nobody even knew was ticking.
And here it is, the big reveal. This is the aha moment of the whole story. It all boils down to one little rule in the Premier League handbook, Rule T26.
And what this rule says is basically this. If you want to give a player a raise, but you don't want to extend their contract, you can only do it during what's called the close season. And you know what that is? It's the period before your first official game of the season.
So because of that rule, Arsenal's hands were tied. They had a simple choice. Give Trossard the pay rise before that first game against Manchester United, or if they waited, they would have been forced to also give him a contract extension, and they clearly didn't want to tack another year onto the contract of a player who's about to turn 31. So that little rule, it created a hard deadline. And just like that, the mystery of the weird timing was solved.
So, moving on to our final section, Trossard's unexpected new role. Okay, so we've solved the contract mystery, we've had a key player get injured, and there's a big new signing coming in. All of this means Trossard's world at Arsenal has been completely turned upside down.
Look, Trossard was always a good player, right? But now, his specific skills are more valuable than ever. His versatility? Well, now that's emergency cover for Havertz at striker. His experience? Suddenly, that's vital leadership in a pretty young attack. And his track record of scoring and assisting in the Premier League, that's guaranteed firepower you can rely on. He's literally gone from being a player they might sell to a player they can't afford to lose, from expendable to essential.
Now, even with Trossard stepping up, losing a player like Havertz meant Arsenal still had to make a move, and boy, did they move fast. They went out and effectively hijacked a transfer that their rivals, Tottenham, were trying to make. They swooped in for Crystal Palace's star man, Eberechi Eze, to give their attack that extra bit of magic it needed.
So let's just recap this wild ride. We started with Trossard possibly being sold, then came a bizarre contract that nobody understood, which was then explained by an obscure rule. All happening right before a key injury changed everything. And through it all, Leandro Trossard is still an Arsenal player. And arguably, he's more important now than he's ever been. So the big news star Eberechi Eze coming in, it leaves us with one last big question. Has this whole strange series of events accidentally turned Leandro Trossard into Arsenal's single most important substitute? Something to think about.